Zero.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Philosophical Conversations with Thomas Jefferson, which is a subset of the one work, five questions that we have with Colonel Andrew Holowchak.
Is that
Today we are-
is the word subset, is that synonymous with hooponym? By the way, I just
I
thought
think
I
it
was
is with
wondering.
Utopian
Oh, okay.
one of your favorite words, right?
That's something I just acquired recently. I
I
just
like
wanted I
that.
wanted to use it. You know,
And I see you're at the UVA Gardens, which is very nice, right behind you.
yes, I am. The gardens about what you're talking. This would be one of the student gardens. So this is the back of what a student would have had a little residence in between the pavilions of the professors. And of course, back at that time, students would have had slaves and to help them, and they would have had a garden for
One of
fruits
your
and
many
vegetables.
travels, world traveler,
That's it.
from the steppes of the Ukraine to here.
That's
I
it.
love it.
I've been nowhere and I've been everywhere, in a manner of speaking.
Well, today we're doing a book review. I'm a fervent reader of Dr. Holowchak's books, and I wanted to pick a few. And so today we're going to do a book review of the Colonel's book, Thomas Jefferson's Philosophy of Education, A Utopian Dream. I'm your host, George Gori, formerly a captain with the California Highway Patrol and currently a criminal investigator with the Alameda County District Attorney's Office. And the aim of this show is to examine thoroughly the philosophy of Thomas Jefferson through several questions. It's not the one work, five questions, but it's through several we've created here. The work today is to review the Colonel's book, as I stated. Dr. H., the sole Colonel, is a professor of philosophy and history who taught at institutions such as the University of Pittsburgh's, the University of Michigan, Rowan University, and Rutgers University, Camden. He is the author, editor of over 70 books and nearly 400 published essays, formal and informal, on topics such as ethics, ancient philosophy, science, psychoanalysis, and critical thinking. His current research is on Thomas Jefferson. He is acknowledged by many scholars to be the world's foremost authority and has published over 300 essays, formal and informal, and has 30 books on Thomas Jefferson. He also writes about the Ukraine. So as we get started here, Colonel, I'm going to read a quote from Thomas Jefferson
If someone from Ukraine heard you say writing on the Ukraine, they would off with your head.
about the Ukraine,
No, they don't like
right?
the word
He
the
writes about the
Ukraine.
Ukraine.
It's about Ukraine. They don't like the definite article. The.
Yeah, because it is an independent
Anyways,
nation.
we can go, but I will caution you. I'm out of sorts because I haven't had a cigar. I need to go to the cigar store and get a couple at least. It's been.
Having a cigar, a nice Maduro is a must. I would agree.
Yeah. All right, let's
Absolutely.
get going, George. Thank you,
So here's
and
what we
glad
got.
to
We
see you
have,
again. And
it's nice to be here.
I like the idea of doing reviews of my books. I know you're reading quite a few of them, and you have some comments. So I encourage you to come, answer some of these questions you're asking me. The questions are quite good, by the way.
Oh, thank you. And I think that's one of my intents today is to get through these questions because I really, really loved this book. I read it about 6 months ago. I really enjoyed it. And one of the quotes in the book, which is a very famous quote by Jefferson, will get us started here. He says, if a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be. And that was a letter from Thomas Jefferson to Charles Yancey in January of 1816. And that is the book right there. So, as I said, I read the book. I found it very enthralling and fascinating. So let's get started with the first question. And what was your motivation for a book on on Thomas Jefferson's philosophy of education?
Well, my first book was Philosophical Essays on Thomas Jefferson. It was a collection of philosophical essays that I put together. I had been writing, 20 to 30 page essays for publication in professional journals. And I thought, well, what the hell? Why not put these all together in a book on philosophical essays? I did that, and I got that published with Rona Littlefield. And then, it just occurred to me as you started, and when you start thinking about Jefferson's political vision, his political philosophy, you see the extent to which that cannot be separated from his understanding of morality, the moral sense theory, and the purposes of education. That's what we're all about today. Those three things go hand in glove, hand in glove, if you can put two hands in glove. I've always said that the underpinning for Jefferson is really his morality, that everything is for the sake of producing good moral citizens, or at least everything is grounded on that, given that everybody has a moral sense. We want to create a political system, the Republican government, for example, in which all people are allowed to thrive in a responsible way. So I put together, that collection of essays, and it occurred to me that I could have something to say, a book on Jefferson's, the philosophy of Thomas Jefferson, which covers his political philosophy, number one, his moral sense, his philosophy, his ethics or moral sensitivity, and then a third part would be his philosophy of education. And I put together an introductory chapter, and then 3 chapters each on political philosophy, moral sense, morality, and then education. And then once I did that, I realized, this is woefully incomplete. There's much more to say. So I thought I came up with a trilogy of projects. I thought I'll do one on Jefferson's political philosophy. I'll do one on his philosophy of education. I'll do one on morality. And the one to which I turned immediately was the one book you just saw, Thomas Jefferson's philosophy of education, A Utopian Dream. I mean, I don't know why I did that one first, but I just did. And that was published by Routledge, which is a fine publisher. Fairly expensive book, unfortunately, but it turned out to be a good book. So that was the motivation. I mean, I just turned to that, and I just realized there's so much to say about his views of education. One thing to add is Thomas Jefferson always believed, and that might be the last chapter, if I remember correctly, or the last chapter of my book on morality, is that Jefferson was a lifelong learner. Jefferson was someone who just believed that a good Republican citizen is always going to be someone who's learning all the time, wants to learn all the time, and wants to learn useful information. Useful information is information that betters the person, betters the culture and the society in which he lives, and betters presumably even the globe.
Absolutely. And that's the one thing I really enjoyed about the book is you did go thoroughly through his philosophy of education. And the second question, it's kind of like, what is Thomas Jefferson's intent and motivation in outlining this plan and formulating for a public education? You touched on it, but he authored the following bills in his life: a bill for establishing a public library, this is in 1779, I believe, a bill for amending the Constitution of William and Mary, and a bill for the more general diffusion of knowledge. What was the purpose of this trifecta of bills that he introduced?
Well, he set upon in 1776, after the Declaration of Independence, to rewrite the laws of Virginia. And in doing so, he and 4 other Virginians sat down. George Wythe, his lawyer friend, was one, sat down to rewrite all the laws, to update them and republicanize them, as it were. I mean, he's peddling a version of a Republican philosophy of politics or political philosophy, I should say. And the laws themselves were, in many respects, outdated, and they needed to be updated to some extent updated, because you can't just replace all the laws, to give it a Republican face, as it were. You understand what I mean?
Yes, from going from monarchy and hierarchy to Republican system is a very different
government
thing.
of and by the people, right?
Yeah.
Where the government is of the people, and it's for the people, I should say, not just of and by, but for the people. The aim of the government is the well-being of all the citizens, each citizen considered as one. And so he drafts these bills, Bill 79, Bill 80, Bill 81, and none of them, so these are put forth for consideration. He writes it. I'll read what he writes in his autobiography, which published in 1821. He says, "We thought that on this subject, education, in other words, a systemical plan of general education should be proposed, and I was requested to undertake it. I accordingly prepared 3 bills for the revisal, proposing 3 district grades of education reaching all classes: 1, elementary schools for children generally, rich and poor. Notice rich and poor, all people to get some degree, even women, some degree of general education. Two, colleges for a middle degree of instruction calculated for the common purposes of life. As such, would be desirable for all who were in easy circumstances. I'll talk of this at some other time, but the colleges really, were middle schools, as it were, to take you from elementary education to university level education. They were bridges, and in effect, you'd just be focusing on studying languages. It's sort of strange, but he thought it was a weird time because your mind was not yet mature enough to be ready for the sort of curriculum you get at universities. You had to study something, and he loved languages much, and he thought you could study different languages, Spanish, French, etc., Latin, Greek, and learn moral lessons. And then, and third, an ultimate grade for teaching the sciences generally in their highest degree. He says the first bill proposed school in which reading, writing, and common arithmetic should be taught, right? 3 hours we call them today, and that the whole state should be divided into 24 districts, in each of which should be a school for classical learning, grammar, geography, and higher branches of numerical arithmetic. Within those districts, the counties and so forth, you would have wards, would you have.
Right.
Second bill proposed to amend the Constitution of William and Mary College to enlarge the sphere of science to make it, in fact, a university. I love the fact that he goes, an university, not a university. And we should say that today. University starts with a vowel. Why not put "and" there? I love that. Anyways, so William and Mary College at his time was really a sort of factory for pumping out Anglican ministers. So religious instruction was in large part what they're really aiming at. And then along the way, you'd learn some other things, mathematics, a little history, philosophy, and so forth. But it's for the most part, it was religious instruction, and it was, set up like a lot of early schools to pump out Anglican ministers. And it had a, religious structural aspect to the educative format. And Jefferson, of course, was against that. He wanted useful information. He wanted to, and he did, secularize. When he was governor, he did propose legislation that changed William and Mary and secularized the institution, got rid of the Brafferton, which was a school for Native Americans, and got rid of the religious instruction and so forth, and sort of expanded its curriculum. So, he wanted to make William and Mary a university. Third was for the establishment of a library, he says in his autobiography. Now, obviously, you have a large public library so people can have access to books so they can learn. Setting a plan. So these three bills were for giving people, you mentioned the quote. Could you read the quote again that you just read?
Yeah. If a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be.
Yeah, in preparing an answer to the question that follows this, one of the things I said, you anticipate me beautifully. Let the readers know that I certainly get your questions in advance so I can give them think, and I got some good questions here. But the quote you threw at me, ignorant and free, that was one of my answers to the next question. The answer would be liberty is inconsistent with ignorance. If you're going to have a system whereby this system is geared for the well-being of all citizens, so it's a government of and for the sake of each person has to be educated to some degree. General education, reading, writing, common arithmetic, right? That enables me, if I want to be free, I can conduct my own affairs without anybody's intrusion. So I can conduct my own affairs. If I'm a farmer, I can buy my farm equipment, my tools, and so forth without anybody interfering in my affairs, and it gives me a certain degree, and I can participate politically, say as a juror or a voter in ward affairs or state affairs, right? When I have time, And I need to be, in some sense, educated too, so I can read the papers and see what's going on politically, so that people
And that's a
are.
perfect answer to question three, which was why did Thomas Jefferson see an educated citizenry as essential for a Republican society and government, which you just explained.
Yeah,
Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you look at the times that he lived in, almost every country was a monarchy or some authoritarian nation, governmental structure. And the education of the citizens was really only for the wealthy, for the elite. It really wasn't for everyday citizens. If you went to France or Britain being more free than France, but if you went to these countries, it wasn't like the average farmer had the ability to better his lot in life as a serf in Germany, let's say, or Russia.
yeah, it was thought, and the well-being, the gentry in Virginia did not want any of these bills to pass. Now, why? They created all sorts of trouble for his bill for the general diffusion of knowledge in 1779, and didn't pass. And Jefferson explains in several writings, some letters, that in effect, if I'm part of the aristocracy, I'm not sending my kids to public schools. I'm sending them, they're going to get private tutors. But if I'm going to be taxed like everybody else for the general education, for the non-gentry, for the people who are not part of the Virginian aristocracy, then I'm paying twice for my son's education, for example. So they voted against it. They're very much they're very much against it. They wanted things to remain the way things have been. In other words, they were property people. They were well-to-do or wealthy, and they wanted their children to be well-to-do or wealthy, and they did not want to see common people having access to what they have access to. The same privileges that the wealthy people have in Virginian society and so forth. Now, part of that,
Looking out for their class, right?
pardon me?
They were looking out for their own class in that sense.
Yeah, and it's just, yeah, I mean, they're the have and have nots. I mean, in early colonial America and in Virginia, it wasn't like you'd see in France, for example.
No.
We have very wealthy people, then you have people that are suffering just to get by, the penurious, not just the impoverished, but the very impoverished or the penurious. I don't know what that word means either, but I think it means something like really, really not having a lot of clamatos, a lot of money. I like to call Jefferson an ambassador for liberty. And I keep coming back to that. I wrote my one book, one I'm sure you haven't read, The Disease of Liberty. I really like that book because I explore the concept of liberty, and I explore the notion of Jefferson as an ambassador for liberty. And I think it's important to keep hammering that home to our audience, because this guy believed that humans were essentially free. And that freedom, so it's so important to understand what he meant by liberty. And liberty had several meanings for Jefferson when you see his writings. There's the liberty for me to be able to do whatever I want to do, to make choices and so forth. Well, that liberty is not very interesting, is it? If I'm free to, Isaiah Berlin talked about negative and positive liberty. Negative liberty means the ability for me to make choices without, say, government intruding, saying, no, you can't do that. So I can make all the choices I want, right? And that's a good thing. But what if I have nothing from which to choose? I mean, I like ales quite a bit. Imagine I go to my favorite ale store and they have nothing but Bell's Two-Hearted Ale, which is a fine sort of, Indian pale ale. But that's the only ale that they sell. Someone says, you're free to buy whatever you want, but they're only selling one thing. How interesting is that? So you need
Right.
Positive liberty, which is a sense, so the government in some sense has to intrude in persons' affairs, like creating roads and railroads and things to enable you to travel, to be able to have access to certain things, to create some sort of diversity in logistical or structural matters so that you can
Right.
have choices. if that makes
Well,
sense.
let me ask you this, based on what you just said, our fourth question, it fits perfectly. It's does Thomas Jefferson see education, and I think you answered this, but I think you can expand on it a little bit, as sustaining the link between the rights and the responsibilities of citizenship in a republic? And we always talk about our rights today, about our liberties, which are obviously very important, but he refers to responsibilities in some of his writings. And what is the sustaining link between those two? Or is there a sustaining link, I should say?
Well, yeah, I mean, we talked about, Jefferson as a Ciceronian, last week, and we talked about him as a Lockean liberal, and I stated that he was both. That we shouldn't take him to be sort of a Ciceronian communitarian where everything is for the sake of the state. The individual is of lesser importance than the state, or a Lockean atomist where each individual is in some sense greater axiologically. When I say axiologically, in terms of their worth, axion in Greek is a word for relating to worth. We have axioms in mathematics and stuff because these are the most fundamental principles, the most worthwhile principles. So yeah, Jefferson, so, I mean, this notion of rights and responsibility, I think is a very penetrating and difficult question, because being able to be free to do whatever I wanted, it means I can do, right? I have the rights to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. But if everybody just behaves, say, chaotically, which Plato envisages in books 8 and 9 of his Republic, then you have absolute chaos. There has to be some sort of giving back, some sort of notion of responsibility towards governmental matters, towards paying taxes, jury duty. The government is given this to me. I mean, I have it by nature. So it's not like the government's given to me literally. I mean, I have these rights by nature. At least Jefferson thinks so. So the government is just securing what nature gave me. It's allowing me to act on it, whereas prior governments, like you talked about, totalitarian or governments like that, don't allow me to act on my liberties, don't allow me to have rights in certain liberties. So there is a balancing act that goes on when you have natural rights. Jefferson says, questions of natural right are triable by their conformity with the moral sense and reason of man. So he thinks what we have by natural right, if we want to say something is a natural right, the way to test that is to see if that agrees with our moral feelings, if that agrees with reason as well. So there's a sort of dyadic way of trying that. Now, he talked of everything Jefferson did, right? He had you remember on his gravestone, he had 3 things. Do you remember what they were?
Declaration of Independence, right?
Yeah. Yes.
UVA,
Yeah.
University of Virginia, and the Statute for Religious Freedom.
Right. Now, all these were important. Talk about ambassador for liberty. All these were important for liberty. Religious freedom was necessary, right? Because so many different religions. And Jefferson was always saying religion is a personal matter. His own children and grandchildren, his daughter, and their children did not know whether he had a denomination or what he believed, in terms of his own religiosity. They didn't know till he perished, right? Just what his views were. And he's always so insistent that, your own religious views are your own views, and no one should attack you for that. Mm-hmm. He even in his notes on Virginia talks about, one thing is if there is a God and God gives us a moral sense and God enables us to debate religious reasons, even his own existence. We can even argue whether or not God exists, whether there is a God. Jefferson says, well, God allows us to do that. Why would God do that? Why would God create things in so many ways that people practice religion in thousands of different ways? And Jefferson comes up with an answer to that. And he says, well, that's just what God wanted us to be free to pursue these things on our own, whatever. But as you said, it's just the whole thing, like the quote you just read, liberty is inconsistent with ignorance. If we understand liberty or right, we have to understand, we have to have knowledge, and we have to have useful knowledge that benefits us as well as the people within our larger community and benefits humanity as a whole. Right?
I'm paraphrasing him here because I don't have the quote in front of me. There's another quote that I've read where he talks about rightful liberty, and I'm paraphrasing him. He says that it's basically constructed by respecting the rights of others. You know, in other words, you don't just have the freedom to drive 150 miles down the freeway and jeopardize everybody's life just because that's what you want to do. I'm using that in a modern context, but
So
rightful
Jefferson did
liberty
not
isn't
have an
just do whatever you want.
automobile.
Yeah. I
He
mean,
did not
just
have
having
his.
rightful liberty
Yeah.
doesn't mean do whatever you want, right?
No, of course not. And that's the whole thing with responsibility. This is just, he's anticipating what John Stuart Mill will say in On Liberty, in this little, it's not a manifesto, but it's a little booklet called On Liberty. I taught that on so many different occasions. And everything Mill says there is Jefferson anticipates. But Mill goes into greater philosophical detail that one wishes Jefferson would have gone into. It's a magnificent book. It is the Bible for liberals, I guess, for modern liberals today.
I think so.
Yeah. And notice I said if you're going to have government for and of the people, you have to make changes to the very structure of government. We need religious freedom. We need riddance of entails, how property is passed on from generation to generation, especially among the wealthy people, and primogeniture, the whole notion that wealth gets passed on to the eldest son, and then the other sons get so screwed. So
Right.
I mean,
he's out of luck.
yeah, and Jefferson wanted a system where, when he was writing his proposed constitution for Virginia, he wanted to give every Virginian, every male, he's talking about white males specifically, not because he's a racist or anything, but that's just what the law held. Every should have access to 50 acres of land. If I own 23, for example, then the government would grant me 27 more acres. And the idea of property was the measure of your wealth. We didn't think of money at the time as a measure. It's what you owned, the property you had. Property was something that could be, I just noticed in back of me, the beautiful sycamores there peeling their bark. Anyways, I should have been more aware of that. But anyway, Jefferson was a very visionary in terms of just looking at land. As a lawyer, almost all the cases with which he dealt were cases of property, cases of slave. When he was advocating for freeing a slave and he was defending a slave, trying to free the slave, that would have been a property case. But land was very much in dispute at the time, because after the French and Indian Wars, the Americans were sort of land hungry and wanted to move into beyond the Appalachian Mountains and, move into that area and develop that area and so forth. And of course, Britain didn't want them to do that. Another source of tension. But I mean, so we needed to get rid of entails, primogeniture, religious freedom, and we needed to push educational reform. Because what we had is we had institutions. We didn't have, we had private education, not public education. And the private education ensured that the wealthy would continue to be wealthy and the poor would continue to be poor, because the poor people had no access to free education, except at Sunday schools, where what they could learn was limited.
Well, let me ask you this. Based on that, the question 5 dovetails. This is a perfect way of dovetailing into question 5 with what you were talking about. When he proposed this curriculum for the University of Virginia, he recommends a curriculum of texts for the students at the university, right? And in this curriculum, he also recommends the exclusion of texts that were, as he put it, quote unquote, federalist or Tory in nature. And, there are people today that ask, well, he was a champion of free speech and thought, why would he advocate this? He also excluded the professors. It's kind of two separate issues, but it's similar. He also excluded a professorship of divinity, which caused a kind of a bit of a stir, did it not? So those two things, these exclusions, caused him some problems in his reputation nowadays. What do you say to that?
I don't get all, I don't get all stirred up by him excluding Toryist sorts of education. I think he would have been fine. He would have said, of course, in the northern institutions, you're getting, education probably is more Toryist or Federalist in the plant, and he didn't bark too much about that. To John Cartwright, 1824, a couple letters here late in life. He says, there's some novelties at UVA. Of that, a professorship of the principles of government, you express your approbation, your approval. They'll be founded in the rights of man. As the histories and laws left us in that type in dialect, we must be the textbooks of the reading of the learners. They will imbibe in the language of the free principles of government. So he wanted things like George Washington's farewell address, which I think was written by Madison, the Declaration of Independence, Federalist Papers, things like that to be studied that were based in, he wanted people to be reading texts that reinforced the notion that government is for and of the people, right? Not that kings could ride roughshod over people and, that kings were chosen by God. I don't have a problem with that. He wants people to get steeped and educated in Republican texts so that they will be Republicanized, and that will help Republicanize them. He says to James Madison, 1825, he says, in the selection of our law professor, we must be rigorously attentive to his political principles and so forth. And he starts talking about Coke Littleton. He talks about Blackstone and so forth, being notorious and so forth. He says, they suppose themselves indeed to be Whigs because they no longer show what Whiggism or Republicanism mean. In our seminary, that vestal flame is to be kept alive. It is thence to be spread anew over our own and sister states, if we are true. Notice it says sister states, states that are aligned to Republican principles of government. He's thinking of the southern states. If we are true and vigilant in our trust, within a dozen or 20 years, a majority of our own legislature will be from one school, and many disciplines will have carried its doctrines with them to their several states and will have learned 11 thus the whole mass. So he wants people to be able to come to the University of Virginia to get a Whig sort of education, a Republican sort of education, government of and for the people. You get schooled in that, and then these people will become tomorrow's politicians in Virginia, and hopefully people from other states will be coming as well. So, so he's going to, he's prohibiting. Now, is he making this absolutely mandatory? Probably not, but he's just strongly suggesting we need to be teaching these texts to reinforce that. I don't have a problem with that at all. I don't have a problem. It's not like he's telling people, if you go back and you read, some Tory text, or if you read David Hume, in your dorm or something like that, we're going to execute you. It's just at the school, right? And each school, the schools up north are free to do what they want to do. Now, you talked about...
You said it's a seminary of republicanism. That's what he wanted.
Yeah. Now, the professorship of divinity. He said that caused a bit of a stir. He did not want them to be teaching theology at UVA. And a lot of people said, well, this is just proof of his atheism.
Yeah.
There's a very simple reason for that, is that most universities were religiously centered. Many were Anglican institutions and so forth, like William and Mary, supposed to be pumping out Anglican ministers. So the religion instruction was basically religious instruction. And, religious instruction, Jefferson thought, was very limited in terms of what you learned. Probably thought it was mostly a waste of time. Each university had one particular religion that it championed. So what you're doing is, if I'm not of that religious persuasion, if I'm not a Calvinist, for example, and the school is Calvinist, then I'm sort of being suffocated by the Calvinist agenda and so forth. Jefferson didn't think that was right. Now, he says in the Rockridge Gap Report, 1818, which is about education, early UVA stuff, he says, in conformity with the principles of our Constitution, which places all sects of religion on an equal footing, with the jealousies of different sects in guarding that equality from encroachment, surprise, and with the sentiments of the legislature in favor of freedom of religion manifested on former occasions, we have proposed no professor of divinity, right? It's a very simple answer. The Constitution prohibits any sort of violation of any sort of disrespect for, you know, different religions. If I'm not Anglican, right, I don't need Anglicanism shoved down my throat. So if there's going to be freedom of religion, and the bill for freedom of religion passed with James Madison when Jefferson was in France, we must respect that. So no school would have, because the school would have one religion. It's not like the professor of divinity at any school at the time is going to be teaching all the different religions. That just wasn't done at the time, like you have today.
Yeah, in modern times.
Yeah,
Right.
modern times we do that, but at that time they were just talking about one particular religion. Um, and that caused all sorts of hell, and it sort of limited the amount of money. Jefferson, when they were building UVA, there were all sorts of problems with funding because a lot of people thought he was an atheist or he was bringing in atheists to as professors. But it's a very simple reason, and but it wasn't very persuasive to a lot of people who were theologically oriented, right? Right where the library, the structure of University of Virginia, you have P, the P, when I say P, I'm talking about the Greek letter, we call it pi. In Greek, it's pronounced P. You have the P, and at the top and in the middle, what do you have at the University of Virginia? The big building, the rotunda.
Rotunda, yeah.
Was its library. Now, at an institution, I'll ask you, what should have been that building? I know we have a couple minutes left, but what should have been there instead of a library?
If it was a different institution, you mean?
Yeah,
It would have been a chapel or a church, I would
yeah,
assume.
yeah. So Jefferson is
Absolutely.
putting, to me, that blows me away because where you'd have a house of God, Jefferson has a house of books. And I think that
Library.
is
Yeah.
so cool. And he even wanted at the dome of the rotunda the stars, the nighttime sky at some point. So he was doing some really radical stuff, and I think it was really, really quite good. But he was trying to create a university type structure that was free, that was amenable to all religious peoples, and really allowing people to get educated in the things that they would need to be teachers, politicians, and useful citizens in Virginia and elsewhere.
Absolutely. Well, we're about at our end here, but I do want to take what you just said and kind of dovetail it into what we're going to do next week. We're going to review another one of your books, which we spoke about. It's the unique Thomas Jefferson's unique vision and philosophy. I don't have it in front of me, so I might have gotten that backwards, but it's a fantastic book. It was the first one I read of your books before I read Framing a Legend. But we want to do these periodic book reviews because I think it fleshes out all of the material that you've accumulated over the years about Jefferson. So we're gonna be doing that next Friday.
And it gives us access to the mind of Jefferson, and it also gives viewers access to my mind, whatever
Right.
is left of it. It tells you how I think, what I think of Jefferson. And I think it's important to give viewers, even if viewers might disagree with some of the things I say, and that's fine. You give access to how I think and why I put these things together.
It's the whole point.
All right, George, it's great. We'll do it again next week. And thank you for doing such an excellent job once again.
Thank you so much, Colonel. Talk to you later. Thank you.